The White House is exploring options to fund a multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure and welfare aid package. And according to our friend Jeff Stein at the Washington Post, the administration is weighing a hike on taxes for corporations and for the wealthy, but they are not looking at the state and local tax deductions, otherwise known as SALT.
So editor-in-chief at The Real News and host of the Working People podcast, Max Alvarez, co-host of the Realignment podcast, Marshall Kosloff. They join us now to discuss. Marshall, let me start with you. I think this is fascinating because one of the things that we predicted here, and actually if you look at the emerging Democratic coalition in terms of the advocacy from the House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, who is very strong on trying to bring back SALT deduction taxes, which, by the way, are a massive gift only to millionaires, people in San Francisco. Same thing in New York, Senator Chuck Schumer. This is something he was very much for. The assumption was that Biden would reward all of these people who came into his coalition by delivering on that promise. By not putting this in, it's actually a pretty stark rebuke to that part of the party. What do you think it says about his governing style? Well,
let's be clear here. In the article and in Jeff's reporting, it talks about how the Biden policy is effectively no tax increases on folks who are making less than $400,000 a year. So, right. And you've talked about this previously during the Obama years, and basically that's their definition of the upper middle class. Mm-hmm. And during the Obama administration, that number was $250,000 a year. So it's not that the party and Joe Biden aren't catering to a specific part of the base that lives in San Francisco, it lives in New Jersey, lives in New York, Connecticut. It's that there is obviously just going to be a line that's too far here. And the line that I suspect is too far here really is the SALT tax. And the fact that it isn't coming back is truly an indictment of the policy itself. If there was a time when she was going to come back, but that's just really it. And it's just not going to be defensible.
That's a good point. Yeah.
I mean, here's Max, more specifically what they're talking about. Corporate rate, 21 to 28%. Global minimum tax to 21%. Top income rate to 39.6%. End fossil fuel subsidies. Tax investment gains greater than $1 million as wage income. Tax assets passed on at death. What do you make of these proposals?
Well, I will start by saying to everybody that I am not an economist, so I just want to cover my butt there. But
sure, this is about values, really.
Right. Well, one thing that I also noticed to kind of add to what Marshall said is that it seemed like the White House was also being kind of pretty adamant about denying that this was happening. I don't know if that's just them buying time, but it kind of got my hackles up, and I was like, all right, I'll believe this when I see it. So, but I'm interested in it. I mean, I think that. Like you were saying, Crystal, there are a lot of kind of parts of this proposal or this whiff of a proposal that I think are actually quite good, right? I mean, as the editor-in-chief of a nonprofit news network, I can't advocate for any sort of policy either way, but I can say that, a lot of kind of the details of this policy do try to kind of claw back a lot of what has kind of been stolen from, the American economy by the ruling class, a lot of the loopholes that have allowed kind of the rich and wealthy to not only siphon off kind of our collective wealth, but then stash it, in places where we can't reach it, yada, yada, yada. I guess the thing to really emphasize to people is that whether we're talking about the corporate tax rate, whether we're talking about kind of capital gains, we will never be able to claw back all that has been taken from us through the form of taxation. So this is good. I mean, but in a way, I think that it's also going to kind of show how this is like throwing rocks at a tank in a lot of regards. There's still so much that devastation that has been left over the years by the loopholes that Biden is slightly trying to close up with this.
And Marshall, let me ask you this, which is that at the same time, the Republican Party is going full bore against it. One of the very first things that we saw proposed by Republican senators, this is not a joke, was actually repealing the estate tax against multimillionaires. This is the senator down in Alabama. Senator Mitch McConnell quoted in the New York Times saying, "We have zero appetite within the caucus for a tax increase." How are they going to grapple with this economically? Because we haven't seen any sort of reckoning necessarily with the way that their own base has changed, and where they pay a consequence for it.
I mean, look, we're having a whole segment in the past weeks about Dr. Seuss, about other distraction issues. I think that's the answer how you're going to deal with this. I mean, look, if you're a Republican and you're focused on trying to make things popular or make arguments that are going to really matter here, the book, and this, once again, this isn't a commentary. I'll quote Max. I'm not an economist either. So this isn't a comment on the policies. This is more just the politics of it. By really raising the stakes in terms of like who's middle class, who's working class, by being willing to spend a lot of money. I mean, Axios just had a good report this morning on how the Biden administration is also going to put out a multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure plan that's going to focus on education, climate change, all those broader priorities. They're just not giving Republicans a lot of room to really gin up activity around this. It's not as if you're coming in and saying, hey, like, we're going to raise taxes on everybody. And, you know, maybe that actually, if you're a deficit hawk, I'm sure there are people in the Democratic Party who believe that. But those voices are clearly not winning out in the discussion. And it's just a really difficult position if you're a Republican to actually argue, because once again, there's no actual real voting constituency for repealing the estate tax.
Yeah,
that's right.
I mean, it does seem to me, Max, like, and look, all the caveats in the world, like you said, believe it when you see it. And also, are they going to actually fight for this stuff, or is this like symbolism? Are they going to try to do it through reconciliation? Are they going to do something about the filibuster? Because you're going to get zero Republicans on board with any of this. But taking the plan at face value, there is some savviness to it, because on the one hand, you're still like doing the thing for your base up to $400,000 a year. You're not jumping onto any of the things that are better known, like the wealth tax, the financial transactions tax, which the Republicans would more easily be able to seize on and make the case and demonize and vilify, because they're already a little bit more in the public consciousness. On the other hand, there are some pieces here that are genuinely good, that are genuinely like progressive and redistributive. So they're kind of, and by getting rid of SALT, you're also getting rid of an easy Republican attack line. So I do think it shows some sort of political savviness.
I think you're right. I mean, like, there is a larger kind of debate to be had, right, about whether or not, if we want to focus on redistributing wealth and resources and power back to the working class, how much good something like the PRO Act could do in comparison to something like this. But that's a conversation for another day. I do think that, it is quite politically savvy. I mean, even I, as a cranky leftist, was kind of left scratching my head, being like, well, seems all right. Seems pretty good. I mean, and I think that, that's. It does seem to kind of be consistent with, Joe Biden's preferred way of acting kind of politically, right? Which is to kind of try to hit that sort of target in the middle that does not give, like either side really a whole lot to be angry about, enough to be dissatisfied about. Everyone's kind of grumbling and is just like, okay, but like, I think one quick point that I wanted to make to kind of solidify that, though, is actually in response to something that Marshall said in our previous segment about Bill Clinton, right? Yeah. Because I think that one of the reasons that Republicans are having a hard time kind of lambasting this as they might have in the past, and the reason that is kind of one and the same for why people still remember Bill Clinton fondly, because Bill Clinton was president at a time when everyone was doing, well, not everyone, but a lot of people were doing a lot better. The economy was doing a lot better. That's what my folks remember. That's what my coworkers back in the day remembered. They remembered that they weren't struggling as much as they have been in the 21st century. Now, those same talking points that may have seeped in for working people when they still had the promise of upward mobility, when it still seemed like the economy was working for them, that's not the case anymore. So Republicans don't have that loaded gun that they used to, because the economy itself has screwed working people over so much.
I think that's a really profound point. Thank you, guys. Really appreciate it.
So great to see you guys. Thank you both.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Next on Rising, friend of the show, Brianna Joy Gray. She's going to join us to discuss why House Democrats pushed hard to include unemployment benefits but didn't on a minimum wage in the COVID relief bill. That's when Rising continues.